Before we jump into adding Webpack to our sample project and converting everything to ES6 modules and TypeScript, I want to go over some of the core concepts of Webpack, and I want to do it in a way that's easy to understand. I originally had a really long presentation for this video, but the more I delved into making the videos for this module, the more I realized that it's a heck of a lot easier to understand Webpack just by doing it and be able to take all the abstract concepts and put them to real concrete examples. So I don't want to spend a lot of time doing this. I just want to give you a little bit of a high-level overview of how Webpack works, just so that as I'm saying the terms throughout these videos, you're not completely and utterly lost. When I first started trying to learn Webpack, I was really frustrated. I came from Gulp, and it took me long enough just to learn Gulp and piping and streaming and all of that, and I finally felt like I got my head around it, and then Webpack came along and totally blew it all away. However, the more I dug into understanding it, the more I started to love it. Now, partially this is because the Webpack community has produced a lot of good resources since when I first started trying to learn it, especially folks like Juho, who wrote the book Survive.js Webpack, which is just phenomenal. And then Sean Larkin, who is one of the main maintainers of Webpack and has given lots of talks and recently produced his own courses on Webpack. I don't claim to be at those guys' level. They're incredible, and I couldn't be here without them. But I will say that I am just like you, except that I've spent lots of time, probably hundreds of hours, trying to understand Webpack and configure it for use with Angular and AngularJS. So my goal in these videos is to distill down exactly what you need to get going quickly with Webpack, and hopefully you'll learn to love it just as much as I do. So before we keep going, what is Webpack anyway? Well, Webpack is a module bundler, and that is what makes it different from Gulp or Grunt, which are called task runners. Webpack reads ES6 modules as well as other types of assets and bundles them all up into a single output. Now, it can actually split this up into different outputs, or you can use a bunch of different plugins to slice and dice it, but at the end of the day, Webpack is a module bundler. And why are we using Webpack anyway and not Gulp or Grunt or something else entirely? Well, the short answer is just that the Angular CLI uses Webpack underneath the covers. The Angular CLI is a tool that's been developed to help with Angular development, and Webpack is kind of the engine underneath it. The long answer is that modules and module bundling have definitely won out in the tooling wars of how to get your JavaScript from development to production. At a very high level, this is how Webpack works. There's an app entry point that you can see over on the left, and that entry point has a bunch of import statements that pull in all the different assets. Webpack builds what's called a dependency graph to understand what all you need to run your application. From there, those files get passed to different types of loaders and plugins. The loaders take each file type and do something to it. So for example, the TS loader transpiles your TypeScript. Then, after each file's been dealt with by the different loaders, all of that gets passed to plugins, which do things like uglify or optimize, or just basically do things to the end result. And then finally, all of that gets spit out into an output, for example, a file called bundle.js. Just to further help you understand the difference between loaders and plugins, think of it this way. Loaders do stuff to the imports, whereas plugins do stuff to the end product. And you're going to see this throughout this part of the course. So for example, loaders will do things like pre-checks, like linting, transpiling ES6, as well as compiling TypeScript. Loaders also process SCSS and less, any sort of CSS preprocessing. Loaders can also handle things like images or fonts. Plugins, on the other hand, do stuff at the end. So for example, optimizing or minifying. Optimizing CSS, minifying JavaScript, anything like that would happen at the end. Plugins also extract the CSS. So when we're running in development mode, Webpack keeps all of our CSS just in memory. Whereas in production, we actually want to spit out all that CSS into a separate file, or maybe multiple files if there's vendor CSS. Plugins also separate bundles out. So sometimes we want to have our JavaScript from our application separate from the JavaScript for things like Angular or jQuery or any sort of library. And then lastly, plugins do little things like adding comments or bumping versions, any of those little things at the end that we do for production builds. But the point is that anything that Gulp or Grunt can do, Webpack can do. It's just a matter of understanding where in the process they go. So that's all I've got for you, and I really just want to start digging in and showing you step by step how Webpack works, because I think once you understand it, once you wrap your head around its abstractions and how it works, you're really going to love it. So let's go ahead and jump to our sample application and add Webpack.